But how fared little Gerda during Kay's absence? What had become of him no one knew, nor could anyone give the slightest information excepting the boys, who said that he had tied his sledge to another very large one, which had driven through the street and out of the town gate. Nobody knew where it went. Many tears were shed for him, and little Gerda wept bitterly for a very long time. She said she knew he must be dead, that he was drowned in the river which flowed close by the school. Oh, indeed, those long winter days were very dreary. But at last spring came with warm sunshine. "Kay is dead and gone," said little Gerda. "I don't believe it," said the sunshine. "He is dead and gone," she said to the sparrows. "We don't believe it," they replied, and at last little Gerda began to doubt it herself. "I'll put on my new red shoes," she said one morning, "those that Kay has never seen, and then I will go down to the river and ask for him." It was quite early when she kissed her old grandmother, who was still asleep. Then she put on her red shoes and went quite alone out of the town gates towards the river. "Is it true that you have taken my little playmate away from me?" said she to the river. "I'll give you my new red shoes if you give them back to me." It seemed as if the waves nodded to her in a strange manner. Then she took off her red shoes, which she liked better than anything else, and threw them both into the river, but they fell near the bank, and the little waves carried them back to the land, just as if the river would not take from her what she loved best, because they could not give her back little Kay. But she thought the shoes had not been thrown far enough. Then she crept into a boat that lay among the reeds, and threw the shoes again from the farther end of the boat into the water, but it was not fastened, and her movement sent it gliding away from the land. When she saw this, she hastened to reach the end of the boat before she could, so it was more than a yard from the bank and drifting away faster than ever. Then little Gerda was very much frightened and began to cry, but no one heard her except the sparrows, and they could not carry her to land, but they flew along the shore and sang as if to comfort her, "Here we are, here we are." The boat floated with the stream. Little Gerda sat quite still with only her stockings on her feet. The red shoes floated after her, but she could not reach them because the boat kept so much advance. The banks on each side of the river were very pretty. There were beautiful flowers, old trees, sloping fields in which cows and sheep were grazing, but not a man to be seen. "Perhaps the river will carry me to little Kay," thought Gerda. And then she became cheerful and raised her head and looked at the beautiful green banks, and so the boat sailed on for hours. At length she came to a large cherry orchard, in which stood a small red house with strange and red and blue windows. It also had a thatched roof, and outside were 2 wooden soldiers that presented arms to her as she sailed past. Gerda called out to them, for she thought they were alive, but of course they did not answer. And as the boat drifted nearer to the shore, she saw what they really were. Then Gerda called still louder, and there came a very old woman out of the house, leaning on a crutch. She wore a large hat to shade her from the sun, and on it were painted all sorts of pretty flowers. "You poor little child," said the old woman. "How did you manage to come all this distance and into the wide world on such a rapid rolling stream?" And then the old woman walked in the water, seized the boat with her crutch, drew it to land, and lifted Gerda out. And Gerda was glad to feel herself on dry ground, although she was rather afraid of the strange old woman. "Come and tell me who you are," said she, "and how you came here." Then Gerda told her everything, while the old woman shook her head and said, "Hmm." And when she had finished, Gerda asked if she had not seen little Kay, and the old woman told her that he had not passed by that way, but he very likely would come. So she told Gerda not to be sorrowful, but to taste the cherries and look at the flowers. They were better than any picture book, for each of them could tell a story. Then she took Gerda by the hand and led her into the little house, and the old woman closed the door. The windows were very high, and the panes were red, blue, and yellow. The daylight shone through them in all sorts of singular colors. On the table stood beautiful cherries, and Gerda had permission to eat as many as she would. While she was eating them, the old woman combed out her long flaxen ringlets with a golden comb, and the glossy curls hung down on each side of the round little face, which looked fresh and blooming as a rose. "I have long been wishing for a dear little maiden like you," said the old woman, "and now you must stay with me and see how happily we shall live together." And while she went on combing little Gerda's hair, she thought less and less about her adopted brother Kay, for the old woman could conjure. Although she was not a wicked witch, she conjured only a little for her own amusement, and now because she wanted to keep Gerda. Therefore she went to the garden, and stretched out her crutch towards all the rose trees, beautiful though they were, and they immediately sunk into the dark earth, so that no one could tell where they had once stood. The old woman was afraid that if little Gerda saw roses, she would think of those at home, and then remember little Kay and run away. Then she took Gerda into the flowering garden. How fragrant and beautiful it was! Every flower that could be thought of, or every season of the year, was here in full bloom. No picture book could have been more beautiful colors. Gerda jumped for joy and played till the sun went down behind the tall cherry trees. Then she slept in an elegant bed with red silk pillows embroidered with colored violets, and then she dreamed as pleasantly as a queen on her wedding day. The next day, and for many days after, Gerda played with the flowers in the warm sunshine. She knew every flower, and yet, although there were so many of them, it seemed as if one were missing. But which it was she could not tell. One day, however, as she sat looking at the old woman's hat with the painted flowers on it, she saw that the prettiest of them all was a rose. The old woman had forgotten to take it from her hat when she made all the roses sink into the earth, but it is difficult to keep the thoughts together in every one little thing. One little mistake upsets all our arrangements. "What? Are there no roses here?" cried Gerda, and she ran out into the garden and examined all the beds, and searched and searched. There was not one to be found, and then she sat down and wept, and her tears fell just on the place where one of the rose trees had sunk down. The warm tears moistened the earth, and the rose tree sprouted up at once, as blooming as when it had sunk, and Gerda embraced it and kissed the roses, and thought of the beautiful roses at home, and with them of little Kay. "Oh, how I have been detained!" said the little maiden. "I wanted to seek for little Kay. Do you know where he is?" She asked the roses, "Do you think he is dead?" And the roses answered, "No, he is not dead. We have been in the ground where all the dead lie, but Kay is not there." "Thank you," said little Gerda, and then she went to the other flowers and looked into their little cups and asked, "Do you know where little Kay is?" But each flower, as it stood in the sunshine, dreamed only of its own little fairy tale of history. Not one knew anything of Kay. Gerda heard many stories from the flowers, as she asked them one after another about them. And once said the tiger lily, "Hark! Do you hear the drum? Turn, turn, turn! There are only 2 notes. Always turn, turn. Listen to the woman's song of mourning, hear the cry of the priest. In her long robe stands the Hindu widow of the funeral pile. The flames rise round her as she places herself on the dead body of her husband, but the Hindu woman is thinking of the living one in that circle, of him, her son, who lighted those flames. Those shining eyes trouble her heart more painfully than the flames, which will soon consume her body to ashes. Can the fire of the heart be extinguished in the flames of the funeral pile?" "I don't understand that at all," said little Gerda. "That is my story," said the tiger lily. "What says the convolvulus? Near yonder narrow road stands an old knight's castle. Thick ivy creeps over the old ruined walls. Leaf over leaf, even to the balcony, in which stands a beautiful maiden. She bends over to the balustrades and looks up the road. No rose on its stem is fresher than she, no apple blossom, waved by the wind, floats more lightly than she moves. Her rich silk rustles as she bends over and exclaims, "Will he not come?" "Is it Kay, you mean?" asked Gerda. "I'm only speaking of a story of my dream," replied the flower. Once said the little snowdrop. Between two trees a rope is hanging. There's a piece of board upon it. It is a swing. Two pretty little girls in dresses white as snow, and with long green ribbons fluttering from their hats, are sitting upon it swinging. Their brother, who is taller than they are, stands in the swing. He has one arm around the rope to steady himself. In one hand he holds a little bowl, and in the other a clay pipe. He is blowing bubbles. As the swing goes on, the bubbles fly upward, reflecting the most beautiful varying colors. The last still hangs from the bowl of the pipe and swings in the wind. On goes the swing, and then a little black dog comes running up. He is almost as light as the bubble, and he raises himself on his hind legs and wants to be taken into the swing, but it does not stop, and the dog falls. Then he barks and gets angry. The children stop towards him, and the bubble bursts. A swinging plank, a light sparkling foam picture. That is my story. "It may be all very pretty when you're telling me," said little Gerda, "but you speak so mournfully, and you do not mention little Kay at all." "What do the hyacinths say?"